Shush. Into the microphone. Hi, I'm Jeff Shio. I am a graduate of this august law school back in 2008. I'm now currently a lawyer with the law firm Greenberg Traurig just down the road. I came to learn about Veterans for Political Innovation because one of my Naval Academy classmates, a guy named Eric Bronner, came to me and he started bugging me a couple years ago. Yeah, I got this idea. And I knew because it came from Eric that it came from a good place. He has a pure heart. And it was, I think it grew out of, in part, an experience we had when we were together with our classmates and we were watching the funeral of Senator McCain. And we saw how people from both sides of the aisle came together, said nice things about each other, talked about the things that they accomplished together. And it felt like that was a better situation than a lot of other places that we saw people on the different political sides communicating with one another. So we said together, somebody should do something about this. And as a busy DC lawyer, I did not find time to get it done. But then Eric started bugging me. And then the answer seemed so clear when he started talking about these political innovations, it just made too much sense. I couldn't ignore it any longer. And so then he said, hey, can you get together an event that's kind of around our Naval Academy 25th year reunion, which is this weekend? And I said, sure. And so that's how we all came to be here together today, or at least how I came to be part of this today. And I'm glad for the opportunity. I'm going to hand it over to one of Eric's co-founders, Todd Connor. If you don't know Todd's bio, you should look it up because he does a lot of great stuff for veterans. The thing I think that's unique about this part and this mission is it's a mission that we can all get behind. It is saving democracy. It is ensuring the integrity of our country. People can say they're going after that message, and I think we've seen that in the past couple of years. You've seen people say that's what they're doing, but it's not really. But the beauty of the political innovations that these guys are talking about is they actually lead to that better democracy. So thanks for coming, Todd.
Thank you, Jeff. Give Jeff a round of applause. Jeff is also hosting us and hosting the bar and the food, so you're welcome for all of us. All right, well, this is maybe the most formal thing. I never had prepared remarks running Bunker Labs, but I've decided the stakes are too high, I don't want to screw it up, and Eric Bronner's looking at me, so I was like, I better get this right. So I did prepare some remarks. And I'm going to front load my piece and then introduce our two distinguished guests, because I want to make sure that we orient to the purpose of tonight's gathering. So we gather as patriots to take stock of our country. That is really what we're here to do, is to take stock of our country. And I can think of no gathering with a more important purpose or a more urgent need than what we're going to talk about tonight. I don't know if you saw the AP report that came out today that shows that only 9% of Americans think our democracy is working well. So the stakes are high, and we don't need to belabor the bad data that exists around the lack of faith folks have in our political institutions and political parties. And yet what binds us in this room are two things. One is a belief that the people of this country are better than the politics of this country, and that in fact our politics are presented through politicians and political news are a misrepresentation of where the people of this country are at. Where they present a clean polarity, it's us versus them, we know in fact a different truth, which is that most of us are living lives somewhere in between or actually beyond that false paradigm. We know that young people, independents, are the fastest growing bloc, voter bloc, and that military veterans in particular are overrepresented as independents. And independents are not a state of indecision. It is a choice. It's a choice that a lot of folks are making because they see a different world and expect a different kind of politics. So that's the first thing, we gather as patriots. The second is I think that we come to this conversation exhausted, having spent whatever emotional reserve we have in election cycles. I think we felt outraged, and we're feeling outraged from always feeling outraged. And so we come to this conversation not in an emotional state of anger or outrage, or defeat or pride or victory, but instead we come into this conversation leading with our heads. Turn off feelings for a minute, and let's start thinking for a second about the challenges that we're facing. Which is to say, those of us in this room need to be two things. One, patriotic, to believe that Americans are good and want better, and that we ourselves are willing to do some work to get there. That's real patriotism, not just screaming on Facebook, it's doing the work. And we need to be smart. We actually have to have a clear-eyed theory about why people act the way they do, what incentives could be changed to create better outcomes in our politics, and resist the catnip from both political parties and news outlets that keep us preconditioned to watch national drama and the answer to any concern that we have about fixing our democracy being sort of two things, typically. One is that the only answer to saving America is that we must win our next election. If you've ever given $1 to a candidate, your phone blows up right now with this is the most important election of our lifetimes, and that the only path to security is extinguishing the other side, or related, send us money so that we can win. So those are the dominant themes that if you're politically engaged, you're constantly inundated with. And we're here to present a different theory of the case. For those of you that work in business, you know that monopolies and duopolies are illegal because they can abuse their consumers and charge what they want. Simple business theory. Our politics are in many respects run as a duopoly, but it's an unregulated marketplace. And I will say, as a caveat, this isn't about getting rid of political parties. It's actually about making political parties even stronger, but with the healthy construct of free market competition. Outrage, fear, more money, our own despondency, and yet overwhelmingly, folks are reelected at high rates. So this cycle perpetuates. Having been around myself, having run for office, having donated, having spent time in both parties and no parties, we gather this evening to insist on a smarter answer. We gather in suspicion that maybe the answer isn't what either party or cable news sells us, but something deeper, maybe even something more obvious. We also gather on a predicated belief that most people will do whatever the incentive structure in front of them insists that they do. And so a person can't save us, is the notion I hold, but a system reform might. It's a system issue and it requires a system solution. Politicians are fungible. You heard it here first. They will do often what they do because they simply are trying to persevere. It's a system incentive issue. And we've watched politicians contort themselves over time for their own survival, and some do very heroic things in spite of the incentives. And that will not change. The question is, can we create conditions in which they contort themselves to do the right thing on behalf of most Americans as opposed to their ideological extremes? It's really that simple. And the people that you find outrageous and dangerous, who are different, I can assure you that they're only doing the things that they're doing because the incentive structure incentivizes it. So we gather today to ask, what if political leaders did the right thing, not in spite of the incentives, through bold acts of moral courage, but because of the incentives? Well, I have good news. I think we can. And I wouldn't have gotten so impassioned about this issue set if I didn't believe that, which sort of gets back to Jeff urinary comment. It's almost like when you've read something that you believe can restore what I deem to be so deeply broken about the country that I love, you can't not take action. And so that's what we're doing. It can be different. Alaska has made it different. Maine has made it different. 3 of the top 10 world's healthiest democracies do elections in the way that we're proposing. A lot of municipalities around this country, 5 southern states for their military overseas ballot, do the way that we're going to propose to you tonight. And Nevada on November 8th will have the option, the voters will have the option, in spite of the opposition from both parties, to do elections differently. So this is a national movement. It's nascent, but it's growing, and that's why you're here tonight. If you want to fix democracy, I've come to believe you have to get rid of primary elections as we know them. And primary elections have become the primary problem. Let's give that an applause. And here's why. It's a simple math problem. In America, both parties at the state level in which they're in charge have gerrymandered their district, gerrymandered the state map to put all of the partisans in districts of like-minded folks. If you live in Illinois, where I've lived, the Democrats are in charge, they gerrymandered the districts, and they've also given Republicans some safe seats as well, because you got to put them somewhere. And Indiana is a Republican state where I live, and it's done the same thing. And so as a result of this, gerrymandered districts, most politics are red or blue, even though America is much more purple. or orange or green or something else, which means the winner of the election is not determined in the general election. The winner is determined in the primary. And that happens in about 90% of elections. That's because, why is that bad? It's bad because very few people vote in primaries and only the parties most loyal and ideologically extreme vote. It also means in a close primary state, independents can't vote. Independents represent 49% of Americans. They can't vote in close primaries where the winner is determined. We ought to be outraged by this. I am. These are the voters that vote in these primaries that will punish any incumbent for not seeing working across the aisle. They are voting with purity tests in mind. Which is why the big dirty secret for any politician is that their worst fear is being primaried. It's the verb that emanates in this town all over the place. Because that's where people lose. It's not in general elections, it's by being primaried. So, all of their incentives are to be more snarky, more extreme, more famous with takedowns on Twitter, to get dollars and voters that move them through these low turnout primary elections. So if you change the primary as you understand it, you change everything. But not only that, in our general elections, if you implement ranked choice voting, voters can, instead of only seeing two options and choosing the lesser of two evils, which is how we vote, the lesser of two evils, you can look at 4 or 5 options and pick the ones that you like, in the order in which you like them. Together, this is called Final Five voting. If you've never heard of it, raise your hand. I should do it at the end. This is teacher's cue. If you've heard of it, it's like, raise your hand if you've heard of it. So the vast majority, good. Well, then you are early adopters, and you've heard of it now. We're taking an issue that's technical, it's fringe, we haven't heard of it, and we're making it mainstream. Who's going to make it mainstream? Military veterans. Why? Because we trust military veterans. I'm not sure we always should, by the way. I'll say that in room veterans. But America, until they wake up to the reality, still seems to. So this is called Final Five voting. People elected through this system appeal to the middle and to the majority because you have to do that in order to win. If you don't get 50% or more of people liking you or at least finding you acceptable, maybe not your first choice, but at least your second choice, you can't win. And election innovation, like Final Five voting, changes the incentive. And it's states that have the power to determine how they conduct their elections. So we don't need all 50 states to implement these reforms. This is the theory of the case. But even if 5 states do, that would be 10 U.S. senators, what I call the Common Sense Caucus, minority voting bloc that will speak plainly on behalf of the majority of Americans and determine, therefore, as a minority voting bloc, what moves forward in the United States Senate. Nothing will get done without their thumbs up approval, as a backstop to the worst instincts and as a go-forward to productive efforts. And that would scramble what we currently understand as the two-party polarization crisis that grips us today. That's powerful. And it can happen. And while the GOP Pennsylvania primary costs something like $65 million, a ballot initiative in a place like Nevada is going to be successful for maybe 10, maybe 15. So if I'm a betting man with $100 million, which I don't have, I'm hoping someone in this room does, you can move the needle and get out of this spiral, this predictable 2-year cycle that roils us every couple of years. That's a solid ROI to forever change politics in the state and therefore in our country, but we need you. And I don't think that we have a lot of time to waste, which is why we're here. There are other things that we need fixing in this country, obviously, but my theory of the case is that when you fix first these structural incentive problems, you create ground conditions for people to tackle other pressing consensus issues by working across the aisle. A common sense caucus will quickly tackle other common sense reforms that we want as people, as voters, but the paralyzing conditions in Congress won't allow for it. Just won't. If you're an incumbent and you work across the aisle, that threatens your own re-election, which is why they don't do it. You can't win re-election in a Final Five election if you don't do that. If you don't get something done, if you can't go back with proof of your efficacy of having done something, you won't win in a Final Five election, which is why those folks are eager to do more. And while I applaud efforts that encourage civility, address money in politics, coalitions that have pledges, and I, of course, will support better candidates even in a flawed system. The thing that will help me sleep at night is none of those things, with all due respect. It's knowing that the system is better designed so that people are doing the right things because of the incentive structure. A system in which we as a country elect extraordinary people we're excited by, not in spite of the incentives, but because of them. Imagine being at the ballot box, looking at 5 choices and struggling because you like a few of them. This is possible, and we get this in most aspects of our life. I popped into Whole Foods and saw 18 flavors of mayonnaise. We get it everywhere in our lives, but we don't get it at the ballot box. And we've been forced to suspend a belief that it's even possible, that somehow we don't deserve that. It's ridiculous. But we can change that, and it's these technical reforms that will get us there. So I'll pause here, and if that's not why you came, or you're a law school student who just saw an open bar, you can leave now. It's all good. And frankly, here's what we're up against. It's not even so much the opposition as much as it is this paradigm of outrage that gets fed to us as a way to stay stuck. So if you're not on board, that's okay. But if you think that we're onto something, then let's keep going. And like movements in America, and this is very much in keeping of the American tradition, we are on the side of history and the side of patriotism. This country's had one president who never affiliated with a political party, that was George Washington. We've had one president who was a minor party candidate, and that was Abraham Lincoln. So we are in the tradition of American politics. This is patriotic work that we do. And to lend some wisdom to this conversation, which I don't know that I have to offer, I'm really excited that these gentlemen have graciously accepted our invitation to speak with us. Unfortunately, they're Army affiliated, which hurts me only a little. But I want to first introduce the Honorable Luis Caldera. And Secretary Caldera, if you're not familiar, served as Secretary of the Army, which of course is notable. But more interesting to me is he's a former state legislator in the state of California. Serves on numerous boards, is a professor of election law, among other things. So who better to represent the state of our country and the opportunity for these or other issues than Luis Caldera. Let's give him a round of applause.
Todd, thank you so much for inviting me to be here with you today. I want to start by one, thanking you all for your service in our military to protect and defend our country, and second of all, for caring about our democracy, which is why you're here. I'm worried about our democracy, as I think a lot of Americans are. Very, very worried. Certainly after the events of January 6th of last year, that we've gotten to a place where we consider people from the other party not people who have different policy preferences, but the enemy. Where the idea of compromise ends up getting you primary, where literally U.S. Senator was denied renomination by his party because he worked across the lines on a piece of bipartisan legislation that made sense for the country and was enacted into law. Where you have senators who are leaving their roles saying something that I think would be probably the greatest job in the world, and saying, had enough, dysfunctional, get nothing done, this is not worth all the effort I have to put into fundraising, traveling back and forth to my district. All that is only worth it if I can actually work on things that matter. So I think our democracy is in a bad place and desperately needs innovation. And I worry about that for a couple of reasons. One is our U.S. role in the world. One thing you get to see when you're Army Secretary and you travel the whole world is how much the rest of the world, all these other countries, all these other people, look to our country for leadership to solve the regional issues that are threatening security, stability, prosperity in their part of the country. Since World War II, our country has been the leader of the free world, and what we stood for, the rule of law, a vibrant democracy, protection of human rights, respect for others, solving challenges and providing leadership. That's what people wanted to emulate. And today they're not sure, and they're both hearing it from our adversaries who are saying, look, their system doesn't work. They're at each other's throats. They can't get anything done. And we become so internally divided that we don't have the foundation with which to provide that leadership. And we can see from the war in Ukraine and the threats in Asia that it is still a dangerous world. Ground wars are not beyond the conceivable. And steady leadership that our country has to provide is at risk if the foundation of our democracy doesn't allow us to provide it, including divides people as to, depending on who the president is, whether we support his or her actions on the global stage. The second reason I worry about it is we're not dealing with our domestic problems. Many challenges that we face within our country and that we face globally, like things like climate change, that we have, that's part of that leadership, is to provide leadership to solve global problems that are very hard to solve because of, for all the reasons that I know you're intimately familiar with. But whether it's economic prosperity or regulation or clean air or whatever it is, you have to have people who are willing to, in good faith, wrestle with issues, become experts in those policy areas, find ways to compromise with their competing ideas of how they're going to solve this problem. When I went to West Point, the mission of the Academy, which has changed a little bit many times since then, but it was to prepare graduates for a lifetime of service to the country. And I really believed in that. It was like, yes, I'm going to serve in uniform, but I'm going to still serve once I take the uniform off. And that's part of what led me into public life as an elected official. And honestly, I'm not sure I could get elected today because I was a moderate Democrat who ran in a very Democratic district. Today I would be primaried. I had a friend who's a Democrat. Democrats spent $1 million against him in his primary because he was the moderate candidate. Okay, so the interest groups on both sides are fighting over these seats. And I carried legislation for a Republican governor. I co-authored legislation with other Republicans because my view was like, I'm here to be a problem solver. What are the top problems? Let's work on those, right? I didn't come here to do partisan battle with anyone. That's not why I'm here. And unfortunately, the reality today is it's very hard to have that kind of approach. There are people of goodwill and smart and capable in both parties. They need the context in which they can work together. California, we had on our proposition, on our ballots, 1996, we had an open primary initiative. The main proponent was a former Republican congressman, someone I had served with he'd been in the Senate, I'd been in the Assembly, we'd co-authored legislation together, and I supported it because I thought this is, voters want more choices, and we're disenfranchising a lot of people. Both parties opposed it. I knew it would pass. It passed overwhelmingly because voters don't want to be limited to those choices that they're given, and unfortunately, both parties filed lawsuits and got the Supreme Court to throw it out. And in 2000, finally, a different form of an open primary was passed in California. It's a top 2 vote getter primary. It has some issues about how it can be gained. And one of the things I think is really interesting about the top 5 vote getter is that it overcomes some of the ways in which you can challenge a top 2 vote getter primary can be gained. But I think these innovations, open primaries, ranked choice voting, and top 5 vote getter, they make sense. I'm from Maryland. Although I follow California politics, consider myself a Californian. I'm an expat living in Maryland. In Maryland, we have a Democratic gubernatorial candidate who will probably be governor. But they only got about 35% of the vote in the primary. Because we don't have ranked choice voting, and we had so many what people thought were good candidates, and they all got a sliver of votes, and one person ended up winning. I personally think that even if he might well have ended up being the top candidate, but his ability to govern would be so much stronger if he could say, that I have a mandate of more than half the voters who voted in this election because I came out through a process that requires that you get to 50% plus 1 to be elected. So I think these are great innovations. There are other things we need to work on: gerrymandering, money in politics, no shortage of issues. General Casey and I worked together on a group called Count Every Hero, which started with just trying to protect service members' right to vote, and families members' right to votes. But after January 6th, also is looking at things like Electoral College Reform Act and other things that are threats to our democracy, because we believe that our democracy, that we need changes that will help us again be able to wrestle with the issues that we need very much to wrestle with in this country, find ways to lift everybody up so we tap the potential of every person to contribute what they have. We improve our education systems, our transportation systems, our infrastructure, all those things that are begging to be done. But we're concerned about our democracy, and we think we need to fix it. And the fact that there are groups like this that have a national vision of how to make some of these kinds of changes that will lead to higher participation and lead to candidates who have that room, office holders who have the room to be able to work however they end up deciding to caucus or not caucus across the aisle with others to solve problems. That's what I think what we need. So thank you so much for having me speak today.
Thank you, Secretary Caldera, for those remarks. And I'm going to introduce someone that needs probably no introduction. How many of you have at one point worked for General Casey? Sure, we got a few folks. Okay, good. Well, welcome back. I also want to acknowledge Sheila Casey, who, just to say, has done so much for military families and chairs Blue Star families. And so, Sheila, I want to recognize you as well and give you a round of applause. Thank you. General George Casey served 41 years in the United States Army following graduation from Georgetown University, and has led and done a number of things. Retired as the Army Chief of Staff, of course, but prior to that, commanded the multinational force in Iraq, a coalition of more than 30 countries, where he guided the Iraq mission through its toughest days. Served a number of senior leadership roles in his 15 years as general officer, and today is philanthropically involved in a number of efforts, lectures and teaches, and is, as Louis said, is one of the co-chairs of the Let the Vote Coalition. So let's please give General Casey a round of applause.
Thank you very much. I'm the military side of the political innovation here. I see lots of veterans out there. It's always great to see. One of the questions I always get from veterans is I'm out and about is, they all want to know what it was like to go from being in charge of the Army, having a staff of hundreds at your beck and call, having a G5 to fly you all over the world, to leaving the Army and becoming an Army of one. just you and your iPhone. And a lot of people think that when you're a four-star general, they kind of keep you around and treat you nice. They drop you like a hot potato. So I was actually having a hard time describing what that transition was like. And one day, right before the holidays, I was doing a crossword puzzle. And the clue was Army had 7 letters. I said, easy, General. Well, when you're doing a crossword puzzle and you realize something's not working. And after a while, I realized it wasn't Army head, it was Army head. And the answer wasn't general, it was latrine. And that's kind of what it was like, going from the Army Chief of Staff down to being an Army one. Louis mentioned Count Every Hero, and I think it's important to note that Louis and I happen to be from the Army, but this Count Every Hero group is made up of a somewhat older group of veterans and national security leaders from all the services. And it's a very much a multi-service organization. And like this group here, we focus on what we think is the right thing for the country, and not particularly what's right for any particular political party. I want to talk a little bit about what I believe is the role for veterans in political action. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my own struggles with that issue. Because, the journey from being a soldier to being just a citizen was an interesting one. And I had to figure out appropriate ways to contribute to the well-being of the country that I loved and that I served for so long. But at the same time, I was dealing with a history of being apolitical for 41 years. You're conditioned in the military to be apolitical. And I have to admit, I struggled for a while to figure out what was the appropriate role for a retired senior flag officer. And I acknowledge that figuring out what I should do is a lot different than what most veterans should do. But I knew I wanted to participate, and I knew I wanted to do it in a meaningful way. So my first foray was to figure out how to get more veterans involved in public service. I had served on the board of Student Veterans of America for about 6 years or so. And I saw firsthand the positive impact that a college education, on top of the benefits of military service, had in preparing men and women, transitioning service members, to live their best lives and to contribute more than they probably thought was possible to our society. I had, as a commander in Iraq, I had 4 rotations of American troops come through there. That's about 600,000 men and women. And I saw what they did in the toughest environment imaginable. And I just knew that men and women of that caliber weren't done yet. And I knew that we all had more to give. And what we're talking about here tonight is a good example of how we can continue to give. Anyway, in 2017, as part of that drive to get more veterans in public service, with a Georgetown University professor and representatives from some of the larger and more prominent veterans organizations, we put together a group and we developed the Veterans Creed. And we developed that to promote continued service and leadership by veterans to their communities and to the country. We rolled it out on Flag Day 2018 on Capitol Hill, and it's been sanctioned by veterans groups that represent 6 million of our veterans all across the country. Maybe you've heard of it. It goes like this. I'm an American veteran. I proudly serve my country. I live the values I learned in the military. I continue to serve my community, my country, and my fellow veterans. I maintain my physical and mental discipline. I continue to lead and improve. I make a difference. And I honor and remember my fallen comrades. We can all continue to make a difference for our country. After that came the 2020 elections. And I asked myself, what was the appropriate role for me in political action? And I can tell you that getting involved in politics, and particularly for me, publicly endorsing a candidate for president, there were issues that don't impact most veterans, but they're ones that I had to personally wrestle with through that summer of 2020. In the military, our bias is for action. And when we see the country that we've served going through such uncharacteristic directions, we immediately want to do something to fix it, which I think is why most of you are here tonight. But I'll tell you that the temptation to publicly support the candidate who I believe could best move the country forward was significant. And I emphasize publicly support. The question for me is, how can I do that without threatening the long traditions of an apolitical military? So after considerable thought, and I worked on this for a couple of months, I concluded that for me, as a former member of the Joint Chiefs who had had civil military actions with 3 presidents, to publicly support a presidential candidate would place me as a political actor. And it could begin to chip away at the apolitical culture of our military that's so important to the military and to the sustainment of our democracy as we go forward. And I also figured that the result of that would be that my successors, follow-on members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, would have a harder job because they would be seen through a political lens. So I decided to stay out of the fray and just devote my conscience. You know, the other thing that I thought as I was going through that, I really realized at the end that who cares what George Casey thinks and who he was going to vote for president. The reality was I'd be a one-day wonder and nobody else would care. So I decided not to rock the boat. After that, I passed on endorsing the candidate. I signed on with Cat Never Hero, and as we said, to ensure the voices of our servicemen and women and their families are heard. And then I signed up to be a poll worker in Arlington, Virginia. And it might seem like a small thing, but I felt that it was an opportunity where I could bring my learned apolitical bias to help me navigate partisan issues and be really an honest broker that could look at an issue from all sides and do what I thought was the best thing for the country and not for a political party. I'll close with this. Citizens in a democracy have responsibilities as well as rights. And as a country, we seem to have forgotten that in the 50 years since the draft was ended. As veterans, you exercise your responsibility to serve. And as we used to say around the Pentagon, no good deed goes unpunished. So our country needs men and women who have demonstrated the ability to put country before party and self, much as you have done. And so efforts like the ones we're talking about here tonight are just what the country needs now. And so to the veterans that are out there, I'll just say, keep pushing, stay focused, and you'll make a difference for what can still be the greatest country on earth. Thanks very much.
Thank you, General Casey. I want to close by doing a couple things. I want to acknowledge, first of all, Andrew Yang, who's joined us. Andrew, thank you for your efforts towards disruption and innovation and service. We talk about there being an ecosystem of effort, so I just want to give Andrew a round of applause. Last but not least, I want to invite my co-founders, really the founder of Veterans for Political Innovation, Eric Bronner, and co-founder Dan Biga to join me up here. Let's give them a applause. We spent not a lot of time, but enough time in rooms around political reform to know that a gathering like this is exceptional. And where we spark an instinct in you, a desire in you, that there's a solution, that America can be different, can be better. We don't have to live in these conditions. Where you take that back to your communities in ways that are authentic to you, that's how we're gonna reposition the state of our politics in this country. It's gonna be through the power of the people, as it always has been. So I wanna give the microphone over to Eric to talk a little bit about how you can stay engaged with us, because you are absolutely vital to this fight. So let's give Eric another round of applause.
Thanks, Todd. And thank you again, everyone, for being here tonight. If you are one of our leaders, our Veteran for Political Innovation leaders, would you raise your hand? We are a small but mighty force, and this is yeah. Yeah, did everyone really raise their hand? Dan, you want them to do it one more time?
Yeah, I actually want everyone to raise their hands as a volunteer in one of the states across the country, and everyone look at them, because that's actually how we're getting the work done. So
yes.
One more round of applause.
Yes. Yes, this is a people-powered movement. It's veteran-led, but we're open to supporters, anyone who wants to make this country better. And so specific ways you can get involved, please go to our website and sign up. At a bare minimum, sign up for our newsletter. There's great content coming out every month. But also, in certain states, we're very active, such as Nevada. Todd mentioned, there's a ballot amendment, question 3, this November. If you know anyone in Nevada, please tell them to vote yes on 3, or have them come talk to me. In Pennsylvania, we're fighting to repeal closed primaries right now. There's a great campaign. Army veteran Rocky Blyer, combat veteran from Vietnam, 4-time Super Bowl champion. He's leading the Veterans Charge in Pennsylvania. And then there's a campaign to repeal closed primaries in Oklahoma as well. So states around the country, this is happening, and there's so many great reform leaders in this room who've been working on this for a long time. So we stand on your backs, and we're grateful for the hard work that you've done. And so please get involved, and I'm going to close with this quote. Let us have faith that right makes might, and in that faith, let us, till the end, do our duty as we understand it. We understand the problems with our country: toxic tribalism, poisonous partisanship, and there are solutions. So please get involved today, and let's do this.
Awesome.